All right, let's stick with Canberra and that first question time since the coalition split. Joining me now to discuss it, our political editor, Andrew Clennell. Well, Andrew, I was going to say welcome back for 2026, but of course we've already had that week where the coalition split over those hate speech laws. We'll stay with that issue. You had that leak out of the meeting last night between the two leaders where we're told the Liberal leader issued her Nats counterpart this ultimatum. But yes, they possibly can get back together again. But as punishment, those three Nat senators who voted against the hate speech laws have got to stay in the freezer for the next 6 months. Now, apparently that was then taken back to the Nats party room in another meeting today. Didn't go down well no surprises there. Having worked in that building, I think it's completely unworkable. I mean, what do you do with those roles? Susan McDonald, for instance, resources. You fill it with someone else, a stopgap for 6 months. Industry won't take you seriously. What happens to the staff? What happens to all the policy work that's supposed to happen during that time? I just think it's as stupid as it gets.
Well, the staff could go to another office and then return to the shadow, I guess.
Well, not
6
if
months
Nats,
is way
mate.
too long. If you
Nats can't go and work for a Liberal and then come back. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah, well, we make a little proud or someone else the acting shadow. If you're reunifying. But yeah, that's why it's unworkable, because the Nats will say, well, we don't want to have 3 less positions for 6 months, and maybe if she'd said a month, that would have worked. I don't know, but my understanding is the Nats aren't going to accept that deal. So it's a pretty intractable situation, and the crazy thing about it is if Angus Taylor replaces Sussan Ley as leader, of course he'll reinstate them. So Sussan Ley, I guess there's an argument she may as well.
So doesn't this make a challenge by the end of the fortnight from Taylor almost inevitable?
No, I wouldn't go that far. I think there's a strong chance, but it's ultimately going to be determined by numbers. He has to peel off a couple of people, and I'm not sure he's done that yet. So he's hoping, I think, that a week of this divided opposition in the parliament will get some of his wavering colleagues to change their minds and come to him. But it's a numbers game, right? There's no point him challenging if he hasn't got the numbers yet. So I think, we'll probably see a challenge in the next 6 weeks. There's a good chance it's next week.
Okay, so she's started out with a 31 primary from the election result last year, which we all thought was diabolical. She's now at a 17% primary. I mean, how low do they need to go before someone's just, prepared to say the lady doesn't have it?
Well, we'll get a news poll, which is the one they take the most seriously, likely next week, and that could decide it. That could lead to a challenge, that's for sure.
What about those comments, I'll play them a bit later on, from Simon Kennedy and others saying, we actually want to stand apart. We think it's good for the Liberals to be on their own for a while. I think that's madness, but he's a Sydney urban MP. Do you think others have got that view?
Yeah, not the majority, I would say, but some. But he probably wants a shadow portfolio, right? So you got to back the horse called self-interest. That's what that'd be about. Simon Kennedy, I imagine. Yeah.
What's your read of the Bernardi move?
The bottom line is not everyone's... just want to make this point, Peter. Not everyone's convinced about Angus Taylor. So Sussan Ley might be going terribly, but not everyone's convinced Angus Taylor would do a better job. And, you do wonder if Hastie was worth the risk. We'll find out, I guess. It's up to Angus if he gets there to prove some people wrong.
Well, just on that, let's pull that apart, because if Hastie clearly didn't have the numbers and he knew that from a ring around within about 24 hours last week, and he pulled out, they met on the Thursday, pulled out on the Friday. If it's not Angus, and blind Freddie can see that they're languishing in the polls and that they're just falling further and faster, if it's not Angus, who is it then?
Well, why not roll the dice on Hastie, That's what I'm wondering. If you're going to try and get One Nation vote, isn't he a better option than Angus? That's what I question. If Angus gets there and he doesn't shift that One Nation vote, there's a lot of pressure on him if he gets there. That's for sure.
Oh,
I don't see Angus Taylor as some sort of messiah. I don't think anyone does, except Angus.
Well, we'll see. Bernardi today announced, worst kept secret, of course, announced that he'll lead One Nation in the South Australian election campaign. The state election, of course, is next month in March. Peter Malinowski, Labor is unassailable, right? So we're not talking about them beating Labor, but they've got a new Liberal leader there, another first-term MP. Her name is Ashton Hearn. I spoke to a few people today and no one could really even name her, and they say they follow politics. So if they don't know her name, I suspect most of the electorate won't either. And we know Corey does have some brand recognition. We know the state's full of a whole lot of quirky voter mixes, the old Family First, the old Xenophons and others. Give me your sense. This will be the first real test for One Nation. Do you think they're going to make any sort of dint?
I think they'll get an increased vote, but I think in a way it's not kind of the state for a true test of how they're going. I think, certain parts of Melbourne, Victoria, the Victorian election, a WA election, and certainly a New South Wales election, which isn't that far away. It's a year and a bit away. And obviously a Queensland election would give you more of a guide. So if they have a poor result in South Australia, I wouldn't read much into that. I think Malinowski is just going to dominate. Ashton Hearn, well, she's sister of a very famous footballer for the West Coast Eagles. Unfortunately, he played in the wrong state, I guess. But that's probably how she's most known. She was just on Chris Kenny's show, and she seems okay. But yeah, she's up against a giant killer in Malinowski, so it's going to be very difficult. I don't think that's the test. I'm also surprised because there was widespread speculation, and Alex Antic did nothing to dampen it, that the announcement today didn't also involve Alex Antic defecting, which, given he's in the parliament, would have been more newsworthy, certainly nationally. Whereas Corey Bernardi, well, he's had a crack, hasn't he, at the Liberals, then Australian Conservatives, now he's One Nation. He's just sort of recycles himself.
I think Antic would be smart enough to watch this state result, and that grouping, as I said there, the Conservative right, the non-major party right, Family First, Xenophon types, what was his name, Rex Patrick and others. I think he'll be waiting to see where they coalesce, if they coalesce around One Nation, and that's partly the Antic base. It's partly the people that he talks to on a regular basis. I think he'll be watching that and taking some learnings from it. I completely agree with you, though. South Australia is not the true litmus test. Cos Samaras was saying last night the real movement for One Nation's on the eastern seaboard, but I think it'll be good for us as professionals to observe what's the back end of One Nation look like. Are they getting better candidates? Are they performing better in terms of manning booths? What's their social media reach? How do they campaign? And if that's looking slicker and more professional than in the past, then this will be a good training ground for them come the Victorian election in November. I'm going to talk to Warren Hogan about the rates increase today in a moment, but put the poor performing opposition to one side. What are the dangers of this rate rise for Labor, even though they feel unassailable in terms of the parliament?
Well, that there's more. I mean, you can survive politically one rise, but if there's two more this year, as many economists think, you're in a world of pain. And you're back to really, I mean, it's easy to forget, but 3 years ago when the Voice fell straight after it and there'd been a bunch of rate hikes, their vote sort of went with the rates to a little bit at least. So they know that there's some danger to that. And I think on the economic front, what's really interesting the last couple of days, first Chalmers, then Albanese in the caucus talked up so-called reform. That means tax reform. I mean, I had Andrew Charlton, the Cabinet Secretary, who's in every ERC and every Cabinet meeting on Politics Now today. He didn't deny it involved tax reform. And Phil Curry from the Fin Review in the last hours put up a story speculating it could be changes to capital gains tax on housing. Now, we know Jim Chalmers has wanted to do that. Perhaps that's less contentious than negative gearing, and obviously perhaps it can be grandfathered, but I reckon he's floating that around the place. I reckon so, and that's going to open up a debate. Well, are you prepared, to do something about spending, or are you just saying same old spending but tax everyone and dampen the economy that way to try and get, inflation down and try and cure yourself of your terrible budget deficits? The hard work is cutting the spending, like the NDIS. The easy thing to do, in a sense, although it's not politically, is to increase tax. I have a feeling they're going to look at the latter. They're at least floating it now to see if it'll work. Albanese, sometimes he, tacos it, but I reckon they're looking at it now. That's my tip. Housing tax.
Sure, but yes, but if you're worried about supply, the last thing you would do is alter the parameters on the capital gains tax discount, because that will cause investors who perhaps were changing out stock, who were perhaps ready to retire and sell off the rental property or something else they had, they won't do that because they don't want to be hit with that heavy hit going in. They'll have to make some other accommodation. I mean, I think it would be much better to look at investment properties and limit that to a certain number, maybe 1 or 2 per household, per investor. I think the anger in the community is against the people that have got 8, 9, 10, 12 and are copping a taxpayer discount. I'd be wary of a CGT change.
Yeah. Well, they could do that with CGT too. But you only get a discount on one investment property. But what you're talking about, I think, is you can't negatively gear like 20 properties. And that does make a lot of sense to me, really. But, I mean, they would say, well, they would say it won't diminish supply because we got all this owner-occupier demand. But let's see, eh?
We'll see. We'll see. Thank you, Andrew.